Cool.
Hey, what is up, Oak Life? This is Chris and Greg and Chris with Dev. So we're like Krev. Krev, I think, is our primary name. And we are going to be doing a Roots and Branches when we get to interview Dev. So stay tuned.
Yeah, look, I get crazy when the mic round. No sense of getting hyped now. But
What is up, Dev? How you
Hey,
doing for Monday afternoon?
I'm good. It's the week where a holiday is a part of it. This is a good start to the week for me. How about you all?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah, no complaints. Nice weather. Went on a run this morning, so off to a good start.
Good.
Look at you, all health conscious and
Yeah,
self-love. I like that.
I got a lot of catching up to do from this year.
And a lot of pre-work to do because of the holidays. We got some food coming. We got some calories coming.
Very true.
Yeah,
So
it's
gonna be a good
prepared.
time. It's gonna be a good time. So yeah, we're gonna be interviewing Dev. We're gonna be having some dope questions. If you are watching live with us right now, take this opportunity to join in the conversation. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what questions you have for Dev, for Oak Life, for Roots and Branches, and all that good fun stuff. If you're watching this later, thanks for tuning in. And sorry you missed out, but you can always check back in with us at 2 p.m. on Mondays with Roots and Branches. And I'm sure we'll find out how to contact Dev if you have more questions at a later time. But Chris, where are we going? What's next? What are we doing?
Yeah, so thank you again, Dev, for joining us. The hope of this conversation is to kind of talk about this new thing that's happening both in Dev's life and with Oak Life as well, which is this thing we're calling a pastoral residency. So we wanted to just talk about what that is. But part of that process is discerning God's call on Dev's life within community. And so we thought we could also talk about discernment as like a whole, like what does that look like? And maybe use this as a way to just kind of process through that. So Dev, thanks again. Based on, this, it's still forming, by the way. It's not like we've figured out exactly what this is going to look like, but what is the pastoral residency and how did this come about?
Yeah, it's so funny when you're like, let's talk about this. And now I'm like, oh, we're talking about this. This is great. Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. There's many different ways to answer that. But in short, for many years, I have been, discerning, where is God see me in this world, in this path? Like, in what ways are, my skills and desires, meant to be used? And I think that's a question that we all ask ourselves, and it's part of the Christian path, in my opinion. And so I think it was like June or July, I approached Chris, and I'd already been talking to you, Chris, for a period of time of just like going through this process and talking about it. And finally there was just a clarity, and I would say it's like that body, mind, soul kind of sense of clarity, through prayer, that something had shifted and I knew that I was ready to take a next step. And so, after, talking with you and then, starting to talk with Greg, it was decided that, maybe there's this opportunity to be able to go through this process in a community in Oak Life, which is what I was hoping for. And so, I approached the leadership team, had the opportunity to share, not only discernment around my recent, calling stirring, so to speak, but also my entire, what I'd call narrative of my faith and what brought me here. And from there, asked to be able to go through this process with Oak Life, and the leadership team, has been so wonderful and said yes, and was like, we need to figure out what this looks like, but this was something that everyone was open to. And so from there, I have been working with both of you, and also having various conversations with other people in the community, and really coming, together and figuring out what are the steps that would make a discernment process. And so, so that's what brought us, to this point. And it's been creating a structure, of in what ways can I work with other people who also are in relationship with God, who have their own callings and their own sense of discernment, and together it's kind of like, where two or three are gathered, there is God, and that is kind of the concept for me. What I've come to believe and understand around discernment is we can have our own understanding, but it is in the community where the voice of God, to me, is um, it's clarified in a much more expansive way. And also, I think in many ways, like we will never see the full picture. That's not possible. But with every person who is there in that relationship, I see an expansion, of like our relationship and the openness that is possible with God. So that's a little bit about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And it's even as you're describing it, I'm like getting excited about whatever is next, and even just like some gratitude around the process thus far. You told us a little bit about like this clarifying moment, like something shifted. I'm wondering if you would be able to expand on that. Like, what shifted? What was the before? What was the after? And in that, maybe even like, what's on like almost like I don't know, your experience in general, like some of your background, some of what you do, I think is part of this. Like, it's all part of the process and the pattern, the journey you've been on. So talk about that shift. Like, what was that? What is that? I mean, it's hard to define those things or describe those things when it's like an internal, like God's doing something. It's hard to fully put into words, but let's try, or if you're willing to try.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I appreciate you asking the question. And it's like you said, I mean, I think this kind of stuff can be so beyond words in so many ways. And so much of it is an internal experience and that kind of other experience that, some of us can feel with God. And I mean, I guess in short, like some people know this, some people don't. Like, I'm a person who grew up in the church. I grew up in what I would define as a more fundamentalist community. And, what I would say is, as much as my theology has shifted over time and expanded, one thing that has stayed with me is it's in my childhood faith community where I first had a deep and authentic experience of God and something that is greater in this world beyond me. And that there is a connection here that was deeply meaningful and mysterious, and something that just really, uplifted me and made my life better, so to speak. And, and part of that process of being in, a church community, having a relationship with God that made sense to me, even at a wee age of like 7 years old. I also early on started, feeling a sense like, where is God calling me, and seeing a bit of, that desire of wanting to serve God, and so, fast forward to being older, much older. I've had the opportunity, I went to seminary, and I have a background working in the realm of, doing a lot of, in the realm of like chaplaincy. And, currently I do trauma-informed care and restorative justice and social emotional health, and have had the opportunity to really, hold space, be a presence, be able to work with people in a variety of environments where oftentimes there is an increased level of trauma and pain, and being able to, kind of sit in that realm and the mystery of where God is in all of that as well, and the healing potential. So, I've always been like, is this, all of these things that I'm doing, all of these things that are just keep, I always say, how did this happen? How did I get here? And then I look back and it's like, oh no, this is kind of like the path makes so much sense when I look back, but it's like when I'm in it, I'm like, what? I'm doing what? And so I always wondered with going to seminary if, like, would I ever find that clarity or whatever of like even why I went to seminary, or like the pull and all of that. And so it's hard to explain, but it was in stillness, and it was in a period of time. And I think both of you know this, but I know like Chris has heard me talk about it. I've been, practicing Sabbath and trying to take, quiet time regularly, and really being in the stillness and listening for God. And I think a combination of a lot of just that day to day, I think a lot of the shifts with the pandemic, like things happening in our world has clarified some stuff for me. And it just became like a sudden, like knowing. And I know that's, again, words fail me here at this point. But since then, because this has been something that has been with me all my life, like a sense and a pull, what that is being clarified. It's been liberating actually to feel like, okay, like I am in a place in the church. I am in a place where I feel safe, and I think part of it is I feel safe at Oak Life, and so, to be able to have a space where I really can feel like I can go to a community and be like, this is the most vulnerable thing for me, like the spiritual like realm, like, and I trust you to handle this. Will you work with me and sense God, has been nothing short of a blessing given how long of a journey it's felt. So I think I totally don't know if I've answered your question at all, but I'm going to end there because I can keep going on and on. So
that's good. I think that you put some great context to it all. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Greg, are you muted, Greg?
My bad. There was some outside noise. I muted myself and forgot I was muted. That's why it's 2 and 2 of us. We hold each other accountable, you and me, Chris. All right. Going back to the tail end of what you were saying, Dev, I really like the idea of the safety and the vulnerability and how that pairs with, I guess, the freedom to be still and to listen and discern, what God is speaking and what God is revealing and all that good stuff. I often like to use contrast as a means of understanding. So kind of to like flip side of the coin question, what do you think was going on or has went on in your experience, in your journey, in the moments where you feel the furthest from God or God's voice has been distant? Like, what are some things that have kind of, you've learned, okay, when this is happening, I'm probably not hearing from God? Like, does that make sense? Is that question kind of,
like saying? In those moments where, like, maybe the opposite of like I just described how these moments of when I felt deep connection. So what's happening when those moments are at a distance?
Yeah,
I love that question. Is that
that's it?
Okay.
You nailed it.
I was like about to answer my question without even making sure that was the right question. Okay. I love that question because that is a very common occurrence for me, it's taken me a long time to understand that's part of the path. Is, as a kid, I was like, I must feel close to God at all times or something is wrong. And then I went through a period of time, when we've all had our, moments of being hurt or meeting, whatever, where, at one point I'm like, has God abandoned me? Is God nowhere near? And then as I've gotten older, and I would say, and also as I've just grown and healed and like, made sense of my longing for God, even when I wanted to not believe in God. I realized that, just because I don't always feel that connection has nothing to do with whether God is present or not. It's very much like you're asking, it's like, well, what is that when it's happening? And so first and foremost, that was significant for me to realize, is to really trust and have the faith that a relationship with God or God's existence does not mean, unbreakable connection. And in fact, even when we look at intimacy in our human relationships, we can't sustain that. Like there's always a period of ebb and flow and ebb and flow. And so with that, what I now know is when I start feeling that like slipping away feeling of like, where is God? Or, like I had this image just now of like God being next to me, watching TV at nighttime, on one hand, it's very comfortable and intimate. And then you realize you haven't caught up on the day suddenly, or you haven't talked about your deep thoughts. And I realize now that that's the cue that something's out of place. And so, or the clue, like where it used to be the tragedy, I'm now like, okay, so God's still here. So what is happening in my presence where God might feel at a distance? And it can be everything from just pure exhaustion, overwhelm, having a series of experiences where, that are just difficult, and it shakes your reality. It shakes where you're at. I mean, it can be any number of things. I also find, like, because I just gave a sermon around trauma-informed care, I'm going to like reference that, like when we are overwhelmed or like in a high stress response, or we're having a really hard time, sometimes that can make that connection seem or feel weaker in the moment where you want it most. But that can be simply even sometimes just biology, being overwhelmed. And I think a lot of people might be able to relate to that in terms of human connections. You know, if you're close to somebody, if you're stressed out and you're coming home from a stressed out day and you see your family, it might not feel as connected. And so it's like, to me, a big journey has been understanding that my faith in God can look many different ways. And I think the last thing I'll say, it's like, I had a mentor like say to me years ago when I was like, I sometimes I want God to be a father figure, but I also don't want the patriarchy. So I'm like, sometimes God's a mother figure, but then I'm like, sometimes that doesn't work. And she just looked at me and she's like, can you look at God as a shapeshifter? And I was like, excuse me? And she's like, why? God is so great. Like, God might be what you need in that moment in these different ways. So sometimes you might need a parental figure, and that's okay. Other times you need a friend, and that's okay. Sometimes you need a shepherd, and that's okay. And so that also helps me when I feel disconnected, just to be like, okay, in what way and in what shape might God be speaking to me right now that I hadn't seen before? So
it's great.
Yeah. And
so, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to see if that resonates with either of you at all, or.
Absolutely. Yeah. The images you brought up of on the side looking like you're intimate or close with God, but like actually not being, like, I think we probably trick ourselves all the time. Like, I'm doing the things, but something in my heart isn't opening up, or that vulnerability is not there, that intentionality. I know a lot of people in that space. Like, they God's there, but they're not talking. Like, So I think just naming that is helpful. I like that you brought up the shape shiftingness of God. I'm not trying to be like big wordy, but like that's actually a conversation I think we should talk about more. I think that in the traditional theology, the apophatic and the cataphatic, like naming the things that God is, and then the things that God is not, as like, God is like a father, but God is not a father. God is like a mother, but God is not a mother. Like, God is beyond those things, and holding that tension. And I know that in our context, in some of our circles, like, part of the progressive, deconstruction of thing is we lean on the God is not a lot, and we don't give ourselves permission to let God be what God needs to be in that moment. But there's a tension there. So it's to your point, to your sermon yesterday, the both and so just to plug, look at the YouTube page. Great thing to look at yesterday, Dev's reflection and some of the things that Dev brought up for us to wrestle with. So I want to bring up the concept of discernment. So we brought up a lot of different things, but as part of this process, the hope is that there's this listening to, like, where is God leading you? And there is some sense of, like, official, whatever that means, like even pastoral ministry in church, out of church. We don't know exactly, the details. But in general, how would you describe the discernment process for Christians or people of faith, if you will, trying to discern God's calling or leading in their life? How would you describe that? What has been for you? What has been helpful and not helpful?
When it comes to discernment, like, I've been actually shaped by the churches I've been in the understanding of how I've seen formal discernment or informal discernment. And so sometimes the word discernment can be very, very connected to ordained ministry, like in some cases in the church sense. But one of the things that really spoke to me, which is true, that's definitely a part of the process, like with being ordained. But what really resonated with me was realizing that a discernment process is for all callings. It's for all components and all, and that, going through a process is really about living in and trusting God, like I said at the beginning, of being in a community and listening as a community. So for me, for example, I've been discerning for years, on my own. And it's been quite the journey. And I always say it's between 13 years and 35 years, that this has been going on. But one thing I have always known is that I can feel like a sense of God. I can feel like a sense of knowing, but part of the discernment's also like, I don't like the word testing for sure, but it's like, it's trying it out. It's being able to see what happens when you introduce it to a larger community where you're not held alone. What are parts that I might not be able to see, or what are the questions that I might not be able to ask? So on my own journey, it's like this longing to also be held, the way I imagine, church at its best does, where it's like we see God in all of our lives. And that means we all are in discernment or have a possibility of discernment. And regardless of whether it's ordained or non-ordained or any, any which way the paths that we're going, there's it's kind of like I even like, how I was a part of the Episcopal Church for a while, and there's a real emphasis on helping every single member in the church identify their calling. And that meant that like they were all welcome to join into a discernment process on some level. If, like you were discerning something, in your job or the next steps that, where it's going. So like, I guess the point is, it's like discernment to me is the reminder that we don't have to walk alone, that there's not just one person who has access to God or hearing God's voice, and that there is a way in which God moves specifically in community and can help. And I see it as a very gentle and loving process of helping people. And so, to finish with that, like going back again, I address the body of Christ and the metaphor of the body of Christ. That stays with me when considering about discernment. And, and part of this metaphor is understanding that every single part of the body has a purpose. It has a uniqueness, it has a purpose, but it also makes up the whole. And so when I think about discernment on that level, it is that what is each body part's calling? What is that purpose? How is the alignment of skills and desires? And, I think there's that quote of, how do your needs and desires meet, or desires and skills meet the need of the world? I butchered that. That is bad. But that's to me is part of the discernment process, is being able to ask those questions of like, God, you have made me for a reason. You made all of us. Where in the body of Christ do I fit best? Where is that alignment? Where, am I able to most serve and most love and most be like Christ? How is my position in that world going to most affect other people in a positive way? And so even as I'm describing the body of Christ, that's not solo. Even if we have our own unique calling, every single body part is connected to the whole, and it's connected to each other. And so there's something really important about that message, and to me that really reflects like our calling as a community. And so what I love is that Oak Life has created a process, or creating a process with me, where that's also to me holding the great metaphor up. And it is making a statement that we know that even though like the Bible is old, ancient, closed canon, however you want to say times, to me, the act of believing in discernment in this day and age is also a statement that God is still very alive and very present and moving in us. And so it's a very joyous like process to consider getting to be in a group of people who all believe in God, and finding out together what our calling is as a community, as well as where we have individually been given certain gifts to contribute to that. So yeah, I mean, again, not sure if I answered your question, but I sure talked on it for a while.
I think you did. You answered it really well. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're excited about this process. I think we're just scratching the surface. I love the imagery you've used and some of the guiding questions, like where do I have the most impact? Where am I feeling most alive? All those things like are questions that are part of it. I love that it's just all of us are discerning where we come alive and reflect the life of God the best. And it is for everyone, not just like official, licensed, ordained, whatever, context you're in. Yeah. So thank you. We're excited. You got any last questions, Greg?
Yeah,
Anything else to?
I do. I want to echo your echo of what Dev just said in regards to the importance of the both hand. Oh, I love that. Like what we get in regards to our discernment process individually is beautiful, and that's just for us, but it's also not just for us, because it's that contribution to the broader movement. It's just so good because it's like you both have this intimate, personal, only you can go through this discernment process, but your individuality is a part of what makes the faith community all that it is. Just so good. I love that, Dev. So thank you.
Yeah,
My question, and this could be a longer one, but I'm curious, and we've talked a little bit about it, but I'm curious if you've done any more thinking around like a hope for this process, this discernment process, this pastoral residency process. I know there's a lot of wanting to discern with the community as to what it could look like, but any potential individual hopes that you have and or any potential individual fears that you might have stepping into this.
That's good. Those are good.
One or both.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I will, I mean, I will say, like, one of the things that I am discerning is a possibility to what I would call a more explicit type of ministry. And again, it's always the question of, like, what I love about Oak Life is we're going to think about hierarchy. We're going to think about power dynamics. We're going to think, you know what I mean? So all ministry is ministry across the board. And even biblically, there's not an explicit statement of ordination. It's definitely about understanding that we all make up, the church. And within that, some of us are called, into the church, and so that's one of the things I am discerning is, since I was a little kid, and I know you all have heard this story, I've been playing preacher dress up since I was 5 years old, and so that it's just been a part of me. And for, the first part of my life, I didn't think I was allowed to consider that because I wasn't a cis man or a man. And, and then suddenly, because of other parts of my identities, that wasn't allowed either. And so, but that never changed the calling, that never changed the sense. And so now I'm in a place, going back to where I feel safe, where I feel like there is a real, what I'd say, a real Jesus welcome, of invitation and invite, that I can trust and know that, like, in this process, that no matter what, I am going to know God differently, maybe more deeply and more clearly than before. But yeah, so, part of that is there is discernment about, like, next steps, like, in the realm for me over the years, is it continuing, another church? Is it continuing, there's a lot of realms of, like, what are those next areas that I am, like, asking for, and so, if you see me hesitating on saying that, it's because it's like, it's so precious to me to keep it in a space of, I don't know, because there is so much wonder and mystery. But, since the question was hopes, the hope, I think, around that is clarity around what that next step might look like. And to me, going back to the discernment process, part of that clarity can only happen in community as well, because it's also about, in how the individual calling addresses any need or potential hope from a community. And so what that looks like is to be revealed. But what I feel joyous about is I have faith that it will be. And that's exciting. And so once upon a time, the fear would have been that it's never going to be revealed. But, like, but now it's like, I think, if anything, like, my fear is that this is a precious opportunity for me. And so, like, it's going to be about a year process, and it's me just setting in and be like, enjoy it, be present. It's kind of like the shapeshifter. I don't know how God is going to show up, and being open to that, and being as present as possible, because this is actually going to go pretty quickly for me. And given my history, in many ways, I have been wondering about this process for a very long time. So the fear is just making sure that my fear is that I won't be as present as I can, and then being like, no expectations I have are going to match whatever is in the future, and just trying to let go. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I just feel very grateful, like, to get to be a part of it personally, It's very significant for me. It means a lot to me to be at this point. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
I would say also it means a lot to us that you let us into the journey. Like it's in the short history of Oak Life, I think speaking personally here, like the things I'm most grateful for are getting to be let in to especially ways where people step into their calling, like whatever that might be. Like, so, I mean, probably all of us in the call have experienced that within Oak Life. Like that's become a clarified thing. Like, I mean, I think about Greg, you were not a pastor at one point, and now you are. And so those things within church and outside of church, like those things are super fun. And what a joy to get to watch God form us and grow us into who we become. So we're excited too. If you would like to talk to Sermon or connect with Dev, please reach out and stay tuned. This is gonna be a fun process. Any last thoughts, Greg?
No, I very much appreciate your energy and how you add to the community and how you've committed to that process, whether formal or informal. So I just respect that. And I'm learning a lot from you. You give a sermon every time you answer a question. So I'm just trying to,
I'm sorry. Yeah. And I will say I am so fortunate to get to go through this with both of you. Like I'm like, I got 2 out of this. Like this is great, meeting 2 wonderful pastors that I get to know. And so I just thank you for your openness and lovingness and approachability and and just a real privilege to get to learn from you both. So thank you.
Dope. I'm super excited. So Dev, you got the closing word. Anything you want to tell the Oak Life community before we dip out?
No, just, keep doing you. And I will say, going back to in those times where you feel like God might not be near, think shapeshifter. God is somewhere there. It just might be in a form that has not been revealed yet. But I promise you, God's always near. So thank you.
And that's it. We love y'all. Peace.
Right there.